Welcome to Living from the Inside Out with Holly Wade. Living from the Inside Out is about living fully, guided from your inside. Holly shares the wisdom of how your mind, body, and spirit are truly connected and that you deep down know your own answers. Holly and her guests will provide tips, practices, and inspirational stories to help you approach your life from your own heart. And here's Holly.
Hey everyone, welcome to this week's edition of Living from the Inside Out. And I'm really excited to have a guest this week. This is Thad Cummings, and he's got quite the background. He's the author of Running from Fear and Weathering the Corporate Storm. He lives in Grand Rapids, where he speaks and holds seminars on all matters of fear, worth and redefining enough. He's passionate about bringing new conversations to the landscape where all voices are heard, barriers are broken, and the polarization of our community is diminished. So I really kind of align with those things, and I'm super excited to just dive into more of Thad's story. So Thad, I'm going to let you take it away. Tell us a little bit about you and how you got to this place.
Well, I started back around 2007, 2008, right when the economy crashed. I was starting a business, and after a few years, I actually became very lucky. I got some breaks. I survived the economic turmoil and became quite successful. And one company turned into two turned into three, and I had nonprofits and social programs, and I was thoroughly convinced that I was going to save the world, or at least a decent enough chunk of it. And from there, I started to have a decline in my health while the success of my businesses started to kind of skyrocket. And by about 2013, 2014, I was really getting sick. And by fast forward all the way to 2016, in the span of a few months, I pretty much lost everything. And so, between, losing the companies and the power and the nonprofits and all the influence and worth, and you couple that with, the personal health and then personal life issues, I got to experience a lot of really intense things in a very short window, which forced me to wake up to a lot. And what I really found just coming through that journey, I spent roughly 6 months in a very deep, dark, let's just call it a dark time in my life, and going through the therapy and asking all the really hard why questions and struggling with life itself. And coming out of that, I found the more that I began to share my story in small groups, turns out a lot of people were also struggling, or they might have health issues or financial issues or relationship issues or just life issues. And the more I was vulnerable enough to share my story, the more other people felt safe to share theirs in return. And I just one day I started writing. A friend told me to jot some thoughts down, and then he said, "Why don't you try and write a book?" And it was very therapeutic for me. But now fast forward another year or two later, it's just kind of keeps developing and growing, and I found a lot more joy in my life post quote unquote having it all, rather than when I did, based on American success and that ideology.
Right. I find it really interesting, a few things, because we kind of hit our crash at the same time. We both hit our crisis at the same time, and it seems like we kind of maybe a parallel universe type of thing, so to speak. But 13, 14 was when my health was spiraling, and I already knew my condition was Crohn's, and I already knew I had bouts with it, but this was the big one, as they say. And this was the point where being in a hospital for 4 months really changes your perspective on life.
Yeah.
And it makes things really clear, what's worth your time and energy and what isn't. And there's a willingness to no longer serve those things that really don't deserve your time and attention.
Yeah.
So that was one of my observations, but I find it really interesting that so often we hear the stories, and being in the entrepreneurial worlds that we both are, we see these rises of people, we see it all on social media. We all do. The Instagram models, the YouTube sensations, the things that happen in these really truly overnight sensations, and you can see this rise. But what we don't see with the superficiality of all of that is that there often is a low. If it's not right then, it follows. And then what?
It's, I laugh because I almost felt like I was a part of that superficial rise, because the number of people that, they looked at me from a very surface level and said, wow, you're killing it. You're crushing it. Like, look at you. You're at 23 years old. You're already, you're worth 7 figures, and and then it's and you even have nonprofits, so you care. It's like, what? Like, you are like, man, you like, your resume just looks wonderful. And on the inside, right? I mean, I'm dying. I'm sick. I'm stressed to the limit. I work 80 hours a week. I went many, many years without vacations, and I even hardly had any friends. My life was my work. And that hospital perspective, I always tell people that if you need a change in perspective, despair is often where we change. And it is the greatest opportunity as a gift that we have in our lives, if we let it, which is, it's very hard in the moment to see it as that. But, when I got out of it, one of the first things I did was I worked in inpatient oncology at a hospital. And humility is just, it's such a wonderful thing when you can actually experience and share your pain with another person, and you get outside of yourself, and you get outside of all this crap that we're talking about, right? The money and the success and the white picket fence of the American lifestyle. And you realize when you're sitting with a mother and her children, and you're talking not 90 years old, but 30 years old, and the conversations you're having are not about who won the football game or getting a bigger house or, or what car you drive. Like, I've never, in all my experience and all the patients I took care of, I never had a single conversation that remotely looked like that. And those are, like I said, it's just that humility that allows us to wake up, to realize there are bigger and more important things in our life. And it's not easy. I will say it is not easy to this day. I still fall into that trap, even with my work now, even with, how many books did I sell, or where am I speaking, or do I have a following? I mean, I still succumb to it. It just is a different shape, but it's good to constantly be reminded.
And I think that's the balance right there. It's not that we can't or shouldn't be successful. Maybe in that sense, because we can have influence and impact.
Absolutely.
And we can have that regardless of how, quote, successful we are. And I think that groundedness of looking around you and seeing someone directly in their eyes and looking into their soul, that's where the magic happens.
Scary, but it's beautiful.
Yeah. And that's why I think so many people are okay with staying with the superficial, because it's scary. It is scary to let someone see you.
Absolutely. And and that vulnerability, like we are taught in our culture, not only is it scary, but it's perceived as weakness.
Yeah. We're not taught to be okay with it.
No.
One of the things I get to do is called groove. It's a dance modality. And one of the things that I love to bring into it, because one of the things that we want to bring into this dance experience is connection, because it's something that we're missing. And one of the things that we will do, one of the exercises we'll do, and it's a fun song. Everybody's, just walking around, mingling. It's one of our first ones. And it's look someone in the eye. When you walk by them, look at them in the eye, or smile at them with your eyes, or communicate to them with just your actions. And it's really interesting to observe. Some people can do it, or you can breakthrough for some people as they do it, and the people that really struggle with it. It's really just an interesting thing to observe. And I make that a challenge for myself. And I'm more successful some days than others.
Yes, absolutely.
But I really try to make that a daily activity for myself, is to make that connection. If I'm walking down the street, make that connection.
Well, we don't, it's very hard to sometimes often realize the impact of our actions, positively and negatively, but from the positive sense, one of the insecurities I had with my work was I'm too young. Who am I? Right. We go through those lists of questions, and it's just this notion of, am I helping anybody? Right. I mean, there's no like, oh, somebody bought this book or listened to this, seminar I did, and, they filled out a survey and great, you improved my happiness quotient by 7%, like that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But then sometimes this reality that I've met people where they've come up to me after a conference and they said, I don't know why I came here. I didn't want to come, but, I just lost my husband. I just lost my kids. After 3 funerals in 2 years and getting in a near fatal car accident where I was told I wasn't going to walk ever again. And now my last remaining child also just got diagnosed with the same illness. And it's just like, and you hear the weight and the pain of these stories. And then she turned to me and said, but I'm thankful for your book because I felt so alone. And just your presence gave me the courage to take another step. And that, I remember my stomach just falling through the floor, and to think that our stories aren't the same, and that doesn't matter. I will never be able to even understand the depth of that despair that lady was facing. But just because I was present one day to sit and talk with her and share my book and my story, and then she was able to come back and share that. It's like, it wasn't grandiose. It wasn't this big thing, it was just that simple 5-minute conversation on one day. And it's cheesy and it's cliche, but we always say, just smile at a stranger. When you're checking out at the grocery store, just ask the person how they're doing. And we don't realize how sometimes that big of an impact, because I've been in those shoes. And when I was at my rock bottom and a friend came up and just said, I don't know what's going on, and gave me a hug. And it was just like it didn't solve the world. It didn't fix my problems, but I was able to just breathe just for a moment.
Because you knew that there was someone who paid attention.
Who cared?
Yeah. It's just that feeling that someone really does care about me.
Yeah.
Just a little.
Yeah, it doesn't. It never has to be this big thing, right? You're not here to fix and solve my problems, but it's just the physical presence of a smile or that moment of empathy. It's like, it makes all the world of that's more grandiose than any nonprofit I had, feeding hundreds of meals to people every week,
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you think was the most profound thing as you took that deep dive in? I call it the dark night of the soul, or that, that's really what it is. But when you're diving into those depths within you and sifting and sorting through, what created this? What created me? What's this hardwiring? And it's not about people in our lives being bad for teaching us certain things, or us taking on certain belief systems, or whatever the case may be. But as we dive into this place where we begin to understand ourselves, and it's really scary and it's really lonely. But as you dove into that, what was probably the one or a few just really profound things that helped you to rise back up to the surface?
The 2 things that I would say, and I had my quote unquote moment with the divine, which, I'll leave out for anybody's interpretation based on their beliefs. But I was in my depths of despair, and I went there, the hardest of the hard places, and I didn't think that I could go any lower. And when I went through this process, and I will say one of the gifts that I was given was I felt the pain of those who had hurt me.
Mm.
And in that, I realized this notion that hurt people, if that makes sense. And we don't actually hurt somebody else because things are so perfect within ourselves. And when I was able to physically feel the pain of those folks, it allowed me actually to step into a place to where I could offer forgiveness. And I mean, these are, even to people like my father who passed away when I was in high school, but just to be able to let go some of that anger and that hatred and that bitterness and resentment and to forgive those who had hurt me, then allowed me actually to step into a safer place where I was able to forgive myself for some of the same mistakes that I had made in my lifetime. And when I walked through that was the first time that I had felt this notion of fearlessness in this, in the second half of the equation, was just realizing that all of our actions, right? Like you already talked about earlier, was just every one of my decisions and life actions up until that point had been rooted in a place of fear. And it's not that all of a sudden I became fearless. In fact, I actually said out loud, I'm not ready for that, because it terrified me to in that moment when I had absolutely no fear, I'd never been more scared in my life. It was so ironic, but I was like, okay, I'm not ready for this, but I know the journey that I need to start walking towards and on. And so just taking those times to process where the fear's coming from, even to this day, like I said, even like jokingly about my books or sales or money or how am I going to survive till tomorrow, and embracing some of that surrendering and letting go of those outcomes and expectations. And then also on the other hand, keeping this really well-rounded dose of just humility and forgiveness, not only in other people, but in myself.
Yeah. I just find it so interesting. It's like I grew up in a church. I grew up in a religious home, so I was taught, about forgiveness and about
yes,
about these spiritual truths and laws, but I didn't really understand how to live them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so true. Forgiveness is where the healing lies.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not an easy place to go to. It's not an easy thing to just explain to people. But once you understand how to do it, it's like, oh, duh. Why did I make that so hard? Why did I hang on to all that stuff
for 20 years?
I mean, that's the only way I can really explain it to people. I still don't know how to guide people to it or through it, but I just understand that when I came to that place of forgiving other people and myself, and I don't even understand the process of how I got there. I just know that when I did, and the key was forgiving myself.
Yeah.
It really wasn't even about everybody else. The key was forgiving myself. And that was where the freedom came. That was the moment of openness and that ability to breathe and to just to understand my power and what that really meant. It was kind of like that was the magic moment.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When I do workshops, I do a lot of workshops off my first book, the book that's on fear, and the advice that I really try and share with people, because again, even talking about fear is scary. Talking about forgiveness, one of the reasons why it's so difficult is for me to forgive even myself first means that I have to admit that I did something wrong. And we do not like ever admitting we're wrong. And then we say, oh, well, if I forgive somebody else, then, then it makes it okay and it justifies what they did. And then no.
Mm.
Forgiving somebody whom hurt you, big or small, 1 day or 10 years, what I always try to explain to people is forgiveness is actually more about you than that person. Because even like the process I had to go through with my father, well, he's been dead for, over 10 years now. I'm never going to physically talk to him and get to share that again. But the forgiving process is actually about reclaiming joy in your life. Because if I'm, so Holly, let's just say you called me a jerk and I'm like so mad at you and you're going about your day. I will not know what your day's like, but I'm sitting here just stewing in the fact that why did she call me a jerk and how dare she and extrapolating. And I've now spent time and energy and mental and physical resources festering and stewing in that bitterness and resentment that I'm holding towards you. And the opportunity, the invitation for forgiveness is actually to let go of all that anger and resentment to allow the joy to come back into your life.
I love that description. That is the choice. And I find that I don't like the word happiness. Because to me, that's superficial.
Yep.
Because it is unsustainable. Joy is always sustainable. It doesn't mean I'm going to be happy. I may be sad, but I can still have joy. I'm not happy that my grandma passed away, but I'm joyful for the life that I got to have with her.
Yes.
There's a difference.
That's that notion that you can smile and still cry at a funeral. That finding joy in all things, not finding joy for all things. You're not happy that your grandmother passed, but right, like you said, that joy that you got to experience with her because of the life.
Yeah, there's a difference for me. So I love that you state that you just kind of, and it makes so much sense to me that forgiveness I understand that it's not hanging on to all those other things, but it's the power that I didn't understand, or I didn't put words to, was the power of my choice to choose joy, to reclaim my joy in the midst of any moment that you can't take that from me.
Yep. If for anybody listening, if you ever feel like any circumstance is too hard, I always encourage people, read Viktor Frankl or Anne Frank from the Holocaust, or read, even if you say, oh, well, that was back then, well, then look at the Book of Joy by Archbishop Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama, and hear their talks about genocide and the apartheid and this notion of how people forgive openly people who even have murdered their own kids. And then these, and you read these stories about these women who then start nonprofits and raise money to get these kids who killed their kids jobs and try to break the end of the violence and the pain and the brokenness in this world. And it's, and what I've realized through that journey is there is nothing that can't be redeemed or salvaged or saved through those processes of forgiveness and humility and finding that joy again. But I never ever want to mistake that for this notion that it's easy, that it's quick, or that you're not going to go through it over and over again, sometimes even on the same process. And to even then open that conversation up to the grace that you need to give yourself for letting yourself off the hook, for even on something just as simple as this process of forgiveness.
Yeah. I love your honesty and just the brutal honesty that you share in that, because it's not easy. No. And I get frustrated with the coaching world because it creates this illusion that, oh, you can just have blah, 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 blah.
Yes.
And honestly, I struggle to get clients. And I know the reason is because I'm not willing to say, hey, you're going to have this flash, because I'm not willing to go there. We have to go deep. We have to dig in. And it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be glamorous, and it's not going to be fun. You're going to get dirty in the midst of it. You might not like me in the midst of it.
Yes.
But we have to go there in order for you to get the long-term results that you look for. It's not about the superficial six-pack abs and blah, all these pretty things that we're going to put up there. But if you want the real, raw, long-term, what it is, then we have to get real.
I think you hit the nail on the head with just that reference to our culture is if you buy into a 10-day weight loss program, now that I've taken medical classes and back in school full time for that, I can finally understand why that's physically impossible for your body, that you don't lose any weight in 10 days. But we are addicted in our culture to, we want the quick fix. I don't want to change my diet. I don't want to exercise, and all those things that I had to go through with my health issues because I just, we want the pill. And so one of my favorite questions is to ask people is when I'm standing on a stage to say, when we get a headache, what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
You pop a pill. I don't care if it's ibuprofen or aspirin or Advil or whatever you do, but we pop a pill. We never stop to ask why we have that headache in the first place. And we have to be honest about that either yes, sometimes I get it. Life's hard. It's difficult. You can't handle it right now. And you need to just take an ibuprofen and get through the day. But until you face it, until you go there, that headache will just keep coming back and back and back and back again. And I want to just remind people the opportunity, my invitation is not to intentionally make you uncomfortable or miserable or take you, into places you don't want to go. It's, I truly long for you to have more joy in your life. And that just means we have to, go on a bit of a journey to get there.
Right. Because that joy got buried.
Yeah.
We have to dig through we have to get to that treasure.
Yeah.
We have to get to all those things that covered it up. And that's the messy process. I kind of like to describe it like when you go and you clean a room and it's like the tornado hits before it gets better. That's kind of what it's like, because you have to pull all the stuff up and kind of examine the pieces, and it's exhausting for a little bit. And then all of a sudden you get the breakthrough and it's like, oh,
there's my living room floor.
Yeah. And then you're like, okay, now I can keep at this. And now I understand where to put things back and what I can just throw in the dumpster now because I don't need it anymore.
Yep. And it's, it's so funny because if you think about it, it's like, it is easier to do the spring cleaning, to gut everything and to save only what you need for your house. And then you have this nice, clean, fresh start. And that's a wonderful thing. And that's the cancer. That's the Crohn's disease. That is going all the way to the bottom and starting over in life. But no matter what, you get busy. Friends come over, family visits, you got to go to work, and all of a sudden a few dishes pile up in the sink and then a few more. And sometimes we get behind in cleaning the house and we forget that we have to. I always just want, like I say, I always just want to encourage people that oftentimes we go into these scenarios and we feel so isolated and alone. And in our opportunity, especially through vulnerability, is just to share our pain, to realize that there are other people going through very similar circumstances. Even if their story is completely different from yours, it doesn't mean that the pain isn't still felt all the same.
That's the common thread of humanity.
Yeah.
We all understand pain. We all understand joy. We all understand emotion. That is the language. That is the universal language.
Mm-hmm.
And we can see how someone, we can see their actions and how they feel, or we program that. We learn those things before we ever learn speech.
Yes.
And if we can tune back into that and allow our heart to open to giving them the space to experience whatever it is they need to, but to know that someone's there, that's all they need. They don't need our words.
Yes.
They don't always even need this, they need the empathy, the shoulder to cry on, but they don't always need the what do I want to say?
The sympathy.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
The pity party.
That keeps you in a victim mode rather than the let it come through. Whatever it is you need to feel, let me hold that space for you so you can just let it be and move on. Nothing even has to be said.
Well, and I have found personally, because I'm a very stubborn, strong-willed, independent man. I will own it to the day I die, right? In the notion of asking for help was excruciating, and I had to start off small and just admit things that I couldn't do everything alone, right? And I kid you not, my first degree was in environmental sciences. I knew the interconnectedness all the way down the molecular structure of soil sciences, right? Like, I know how interconnected our world was, but I had to go through this to see how interconnected we are as humans as well. And just this reality that we're sitting here having a conversation through a piece of technology that I did not make, and through internet that does not work because I will it to do so, and all these things that it's like, wait a minute, no. Millions of people throughout the world make my life possible. Mm-hmm. I think I can then open up a little bit more to ask a friend to come over and help me do the dishes and just have a conversation, right? And that's I think a beautiful gift where real, true bonds are made.
I think that we have this extreme of independence, and that is the value in our Western culture. Mm-hmm. America, and I would venture to guess some of my friends from other Western Western culture countries mm-hmm. would echo that sentiment. That has become kind of the pillar of being independent. And then there's this other extreme of being fully dependent. And yes. I think that the reality or the truth is that when we can claim interdependence, it's just what you just said. I cannot function without the person that made the tires for my car.
Yep. And I don't want to, because I don't want to make the tires. Exactly. I'm not good at it.
I don't want to be fully independent and have to rely on me to do something. Yes. You know what I mean? And when we really start to understand that is true independence, and do I really want that? When we can really start to pull back and go, I can't live fully independent, nor am I meant to.
Yep. And
we're kind of in this epidemic of loneliness.
Yes.
And isolation. For as, quote, connected as we are, as coming from the lens of health, I'm following this because I guarantee you it's impacting physical health.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I'd love to hear, because you've talked about lonely. You haven't used the word lonely, but being isolated, feeling like you were alone.
Oh.
You've used those words, and I can echo that too. I felt that too.
You know what, if I'm being truly honest, the greatest pain I ever experienced, it was of all the different types of abuses that exist in the world, the greatest pain that I've ever felt is actually in the pain of isolation. Mm. And we don't realize the effect that has on our physical bodies. If there's now research and you can look in medical journals and things of that nature if you want to go, and beyond the quick Google articles where everybody has an opinion, but you can see scientific based medical research now that can prove that stress on your body, the way it affects your hormone levels, the way it affects even your blood sugar,
everything goes off.
And I'm not saying I didn't have health issues, but I did not collapse into a complete loss of my bodily functions until stress was exacerbated to the point where I couldn't handle it. And that was, I want to say between 21 and 23 was really was really the beginning of the downfall to the crash.
Where you're supposed to be at the peak of your health.
When I'm supposed to be at the peak of my health. And now at 28, I am still trying to recover, just to partake in what I long to be a solid, healthy body again. And, but that was years, a few years of really intense stress. What does it look like when you say, oh, well, I didn't run companies, I don't have this extreme. Well, we all have stress, but what does that look like when it's exacerbated for 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years?
Right. And there's something to be said for stress short term.
Mm-hmm.
It is for our survival.
Yes.
It absolutely is.
And it's not all bad. I will acknowledge that. Yep.
But
here comes the B word.
We live in a world where we can no longer handle stress. I think that the things that we see in the news, and you alluded to this a little bit ago, hurt people.
Yeah.
And it's so true. And when we see the brokenness on the news and in all these things, the brokenness in our world, we rise up in anger. You see that, and some of these things because of just more frustration of the spins that we're being given. But when you can pull back and see that we are just one big hurting world right now, we just need to unite one massive hug.
Who's got the acoustic guitar?
I know. Little Michael Jackson, Heal the World, coming on. I hear it. Irene closed the show with that one this week. But I mean, it's really true. It's really true that's really what we need. Is we need to, instead of just trying to bury the brokenness and bring in more of that frenetic energy that's creating it, it's like we all need to just stop and chill and understand our own stress levels. Because that's when things happen, within our closer knit relationships. It's when we're stressed that the happens, and that's when it creates a little more tension. And then you have to go back and go, okay, what happened?
Yeah.
And ask for forgiveness and all these things. But it's really in the state of stress. I think it's really not as complicated as we tend to make it.
There is some deep irony to that. When I went through my journey, don't get me wrong, I did the seminars, I read the books, I went to the workshops and the sermons and you name it. I went through all of that. But the root of it was actually a lot simpler. Yeah. But unfortunately, the way my brain was wired in a part of our culture, and this, these layers that we add to it, we make it a lot more complicated than it is. And I think, especially when I consult for a company, one of the simplest and most profound pieces of advice that I tell people is if you make the most money in the company, have lunch once a week with a person who makes the least amount of money in the company, and just ask very basic questions. What's your name? Where'd you grow up? What are your passions? And you'd be shocked at just the level of just all these barriers, how they just come down. Like, it's that simple, and two people who would normally never even acknowledge each other that they exist. Yeah. And yeah, it is that simple, but we tend to, as an American, we tend to make things a bit more complicated than it needs to be.
Yeah. We think it all has to be, we want it fast and we want it easy on one hand, and then we overcomplicate it on the other.
Yes. And don't forget, I want it cheap. Sell me the solution for $9.99. Please buy my book, right? I'm like, oh gosh, I love making fun of myself for that reality, and say, for the low price.
Yeah. Isn't that funny?
Oh gosh. Yeah.
So for today, we're getting close on time, but where can we find you? And if you're open to it, I'd love to continue this conversation and talk about not just the stress and what that does, but maybe dive a little bit deeper in how you work with people and how you are moving toward healing yourself, healing your body, healing your full being, and just what that journey is continuing to be for you. And I'd really like to dive into it because, and this is a little bit selfish, I have a lot of men that actually, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm observing, is that men don't feel like they have this place to go to.
It's not safe for men to talk about it.
It's not. And I get men, like they'll send me a message that, or whatever the case may be. But they'll communicate with me. And it's not like they're going to post on my Facebook. They're not going to reach out because they don't want to be seen. They don't want people to know. And yet they're really curious about, how do I even start this process? And if you're open to sharing some of that, I know that it would be really valuable to listeners.
You know what? I know the statistics. I know the book market, and reading books is majority female, self-help. By the time you whittle all the numbers down in my category, I'm 73% female audience, which is hard being a male coming from that perspective. But this weekend I'm actually leading a men's retreat, because what I have found is actually the audience is much more 50-50, but it's creating a safe place for men to be able to say, actually, I do have fear. I do have insecurities. I am struggling. And then all of a sudden the conversation changes. And so, yeah, I would absolutely love to do that.
Cool. So where can we find you? And what's your book? Where can we find your work?
My website is changingcompany.org, or on Facebook at Changing Company. The books are on my website or Amazon, and the podcast is on there as well.
Perfect. Thad, it is a pleasure to meet you and get
this was fun.
And we'll continue this conversation.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to this week's episode of Living from the Inside Out. And if you know someone that can benefit from hearing Thad's story or a little bit of this discussion, please share this episode and encourage them to listen next week when we dive in a little bit deeper. Have a great week, everyone.
Thank you for joining us at Living from the Inside Out. Listen every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern. To connect with Holly, just go to www.globalvoiceradio.com. Global Voice Radio is where your voice and your message is heard.